Hey folks, setting up irrigation for your vegetable garden does not have to be complicated or intimidating. I'm going to show you some quick and easy ways that I use to set up irrigation in my garden. I'm going to show you how I do it in my larger vegetable beds, in my smaller planters, as well as some sort of makeshift arrangements for the things that are not exactly permanent. Let's get into it. Now, to keep this video simple, I'm going to assume that you have access to a water source, maybe a hose, or maybe a more permanent connection that you've pulled all the way to your raised bed. Let me show you what I have though. So this right here is a hose that comes all the way from the other end of my garden, and it connects up to this splitter. And this splitter has attached to it two timers, and one of the timers has two outlets, one of them has one. You can get any kind of timer that you can pull separate lines from in order to set up different time zones for your irrigation of the different parts of your garden. Okay, so back to my irrigation. Now I am replacing what I did last year. Last year I had the skinny 1/4-inch pipes connected to my raised beds, and they were just not very effective. They did not push the water out fast enough. I had to run the irrigation just for way too long. And then on top of that, it did tend to block up. My water tends to be a little bit on the hard side, and I was finding that these were frequently getting clogged. So this bigger setup over here pushes water out a lot faster, the holes are bigger, and hopefully won't clog up as easily. Okay, so here are some of the things that you're going to need. You're going to need your irrigation tubing. I'm using 1/2-inch irrigation tubing that has emitters that are 12 inches apart. You can buy emitters that are spaced differently, 6 inches, 9 inches. I tend to go with 12 inches, but here are the emitters, and this is the tubing. You're also going to need connectors as you split the tubing and lay it out. So I use these T-shaped connectors and these L-shaped connectors. And you're going to need something to cut your tubing. I have this handy dandy tool that is made just for that. A pair of pruning shears should do the job just as well. And then to tie up the ends of the tubes, I use duct tape. Now you can use electrical tape as well, and I'll show you exactly how I use it. It's really, really simple. And then you're going to need some kind of heat source as you try to connect things. It can be a little bit tight, so I'll show you how to use that as well. But if you're strong enough, you don't need that. Here's a little tip on how to unwind this tubing. This tubing is wrapped in shrink wrap, but it's also got these black ties that tie it all together. What I do is I do not remove the plastic wrap. I just snip the black ties and then I pull it from the middle, because then what happens is if you've got leftover tubing, it will still continue to stay in the shrink wrap and won't be kind of spread out all over the place, and you can just pull out exactly what you need. That's a tip for you. All right, let's go ahead and do the irrigation. But first, let me show you what the finished product looks like so you kind of get a general idea as we get it set up. Okay, so this is what it looks like. This is where your feeder tube comes from, and you've got a T-joint over here that you connect another piece of long feeder tube that is broken at intervals depending on how many tubes you want to put along the bed. I tend to put roughly 5 tubes in this 4-foot wide raised bed, so roughly 8 to 10 inches apart. I'm not exact, but these T's are used to connect these pieces together, and the L is used at that corner in the end. And let me show you what the end part looks like and how I seal that up over here. So this is where you use your duct tape. So you just bend it and then you use your duct tape to wrap it really, really, really tight. You can also use electrical tape for this, anything that is solidly waterproof. Can use fittings that have been specially designed to seal the ends of the tubes, but I find that those are really hard to use. You got to use a lot of force to fit it in and then bend it and then twist it again. It's just too hard for me. So I find that this works really well. I just need to make sure that I wrap the tape around it really, really firmly. So I've also tried to seal the ends with heat, so literally melt the plastic and then press it together. And that kind of works, but it's a little bit hard to do, and you often end up having little leaks and the water just pushes through. So not very effective. I find that the duct tape works much, much better. Okay, let's do it. So first I'm going to cut this old fitting off. See how nice and clean the cut is? All right, And now you need a vertical piece of tube to reach to the top of your raised bed. You'll notice that my tubing is actually about 1/3 of the way into this raised bed rather than being at the corner. Now it's up to you where you want to put it. For me personally, this actually is by design because I find that I move things around quite frequently, and if I were to move this tube and if it were right at the corner here, it would fall off the edge. So I like to put it here so that I've got a little bit of wiggle room on either side if I want to move this base tube at some point in time. So let's go ahead and fit this. Now you can be a perfectionist as well. You can drill a hole through this and make it really nice and clean. I'm going to just let it go over the edge because I never let perfection be the enemy of good. And now an L joint to connect this little piece of tubing at the top. Another way to get this in without a heat source is to wiggle it back and forth. And there you go. That's hard still, but it went in pretty good. Now, if you leave this tubing in the sun for, I don't know, a half hour or so before you start working, it actually flexes a lot more and it's a lot easier to work with. So that's another tip. Or you can use hot water. If you've got a kettle of hot water, dip it in right before you try to push it in, and that should do the job as well. Okay, so I've laid my tees out approximately where I want them positioned. So this is the corner piece. This one is about 10 inches from here. Move this here. So I'll have eventually 5 tubes that are going across. So I'm going to cut them exactly where the tees are currently sitting. I haven't done any measuring. Approximation is good enough. Okay, all my connectors are made. Now I'm going to cut approximately 11-foot long irrigation tubing for this 12-foot long bed. Okay, we're all set. Now I do have one more option that I wanted to show you for the end. Instead of using the duct tape, which actually kind of looks a little haphazard, you can do the exact same setup that you have on the start point for the end point. So you can have a strip of tubing over here and then use those T's and those L's to connect it. Now this is a little bit more expensive. Those L's and those T connectors are not cheap. They cost me, I think, about $10 for a pack of 20, so 50 cents each. So I just spent $2.50 to try out this method, but it looks a little bit neater, and it is similar in concept to, I've seen a company called, I think it's called Garden in Minutes, that makes a more grid-like setup for this, where you just lay it on this. So it's similar to that, except that it doesn't have the horizontal grids, which use a lot more L's and T's and X's and other connectors. Now all that's left to be done is to test it. Yep. It's working just fine. So if you're finding this video helpful so far, I sure would appreciate a big thumbs up. Let me show you a couple of other setups that I've got. Now for this little blueberry plant, I'm using a 1/4 inch tubing, and I've got a similar connector except that it's a much smaller dimension. And you can actually do a spiral if you've got a bigger surface and then kind of connect it to itself, so multiple circles if you will. But this is nice for planters and for smaller setups. You can see over here in this planter where I've got my onions that I have woven some of that tubing around. And finally, for the more temporary setups, I've got soaker hoses. Let me show you how those work. So these are just tubes that have multiple little tiny holes in them, and the water just oozes out through the tubing gradually. You can see at the bottom over there how it is dripping. And I like this because I can easily just arrange it somewhere around my beds, and then if I want to move it somewhere else, I can do that as well. And I can move it around in the same bed fairly easily too. Now, I usually use these when I do not have a permanent irrigation plan in mind, so they're a really great temporary measure. So I hope you found this video helpful, folks, and until next time, live green and love your greens. This one might as well serve as a strawberry prop before I plant in all the other things.